Baldur's Gate 3, one of my favorite RPGs of all time. And boy, does it have quite a backstory on it getting made, but also after it was made, and then it released, and then it did really well. Where Larian could have gone with it, it's this ultimate fork in the road moment here. Now, as we'll talk about in a little bit here, Larian decided not to make Baldur's Gate 4 or Baldur's Gate 3 DLC, which was a pretty big plot twist in my opinion. I think we all saw that success that they had, and compared to something like a Divinity Original Sin 2, thought to ourselves, oh, they got to make more Baldur's Gate, right? No doubt about that. Well, they didn't. Again, key part of the story. So now you're Hasbro. You have the rights to this very lucrative property that Larian just popularized. What do we do? Baldur's Gate 4, right? Find another developer. How do we follow this up? We're making a TV show. Deadline's got the report here. Baldur's Gate TV series continuing the game's story. And boy, what a read is this. This is coming from Craig Mazin, who was behind The Last of Us TV show. Now, season 1 of The Last of Us went over pretty well. You know, people seem to really like it. However, season 2, as you can see here, quite the opposite. That popcorn meter is not hot. Led to a lot of discussion online that they completely betrayed what The Last of Us is. I think of the scene of like, I'm going to be a dad now. And just, yeah, like lines that just didn't need to be there. And a lot of that people blame Craig as well as Neil for, but now Neil Druckmann has pulled out of the show entirely and is focused completely on games at Naughty Dog, which I thought was a good call. So that is Craig's mess to clean up, and that show has kind of damaged his reputation a little bit here. But here's what Deadline writes. Craig Mazin, co-creator of the arguably most acclaimed TV adaptation of a video game to date, HBO's The Last of Us, will be taking on another hugely popular and acclaimed title next in Baldur's Gate 3. HBO is developing Baldur's Gate, a drama series based on Wizard of the Coast video game franchise, with Mazin attached to create, write, executive produce, and showrun the TV adaptation. Also executive producing are Jacqueline Lesko, Cecil O'Connor, and Hasbro Entertainment's Gabriel Morano. Chris Perkins, the former longtime head of story at Hasbro subsidiary Wizards of the Coast, which is behind the D&D game universe, will serve as a consultant. So, right away, you do not see the name Larian mentioned at all. No Sven Binky, no writers from Larian, no mention of Larian at all. It's a big part of this story, right? Because they don't seem to be involved, at least not yet. Now, continuing on with this article, they say that unlike the Last of Us series, this is not going to retell the games. It's going to be a continuation to the games, telling a story that takes place immediately after the events of Baldur's Gate 3, as the characters, old and new, are dealing with the ramifications of the events in the third game. Okay, so I could be optimistic about this in one way. I could be really pessimistic about it in another way, right? The question is, where can they take the story? We won't spoil Baldur's Gate 3 for those who haven't played or finished it yet and are interested in doing so. But basically, one thing Larian did with the post-launch support for Baldur's Gate 3 was they added a lot of epilogues to all of the characters. Not just your main party members, but like some characters that you could kill, such as one I think of that's a returning character from Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, that you could kill in Baldur's Gate 3. They might make it to that epilogue area where you could talk to them there. The problem with the epilogues is that there are a ton of different ways they can go based on the choices you've made throughout your journey there. Now, the way the epilogues leave things off is why we all thought that Larian was going to do DLC or an expansion or a Baldur's Gate 4 was like, oh, this journey is going to continue for these characters, no doubt about it. So when Larian didn't do the DLC or the sequel for Hasbro, this is their pivot. They're like, we'll continue this story with these characters because this is money, and we're going to do it through a TV show here. Now, again, in my most optimistic, I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, they're going against what Fallout Season 2 just did, and that might be a good thing. Like, Fallout Season 2, it had a big problem with not picking a canon ending. But also, Fallout Season 2 just had to dance around 4 endings. You probably could throw 4,000 choices as a number within Baldur's Gate 3 that just shape and shift your experience. And so whatever line that they pick to build off of here becomes the canonical line, which I think, again, can be interesting if I'm being optimistic here. But when I look at the whole TV show situation here and I see, like, we're continuing this story, I'm like, so you're telling me what that canon ending is going to be, and everything else no longer matters? In my most optimistic point of view here, I feel like, okay, you can build off existing characters and do something interesting with the epilogues that were created there. The baton pass does exist. However, there's just so many threads from that baton pass. I worry a little bit about that. Again, picking a canon ending isn't really like the worst choice in the world, but I always imagine this being like the story would continue through Baldur's Gate 4 and it would be like a new partner that would do this. Like Owlcat Games to me was like a perfect partner for a Baldur's Gate 4, but they're really busy right now. They're working on like The Expanse, new Warhammer 40K RPG. Like they got a lot going on there, but they would have been perfect for it. So that's my like quick take on sort of the good and bad of continuing that story there. I just feel like it's fodder for messing it up, even if the threads are there. And here's what they say here. After putting nearly 1,000 hours into the incredible world of Baldur's Gate 3, it is a dream come true to be able to continue the story that Larian and Wizards of the Coast created. I am a devoted fan of D&D in the brilliant way that Sven Vincke and his gifted team adapted it. I can't wait to help bring Baldur's Gate and all of its incredible characters to life with as much respect and love as we can, and I'm deeply grateful to Gabe Morano and his team at Hasbro for entrusting me with this incredibly important property here. With no ties to another Baldur's Gate game in development, Mazin has freedom over the direction of the story, making it more of a traditional show versus The Last of Us, whose plot and lifespan were determined by the existing games. They're taking a big risk here. This could go one way or the other. Obviously, Baldur's Gate 3 earned its right to be a TV show. 20 million copies sold to date is no joke whatsoever here. Also on top of this, again, like I mentioned, Baldur's Gate 3 not getting DLC. Why didn't that happen? Well, Sven Vincke said it was because it was boring. He says, I mean, happy player, happy business, but you also need to have a happy developer for a happy player. And what we're doing now makes the developers way more happy. This is what we're supposed to do, right? He explained. Oh, we got a huge game hit. We have DLC. We have to make DLC for this, DLC for that, DLC there, and the money's going to pile up. And then we all just nod and say, yeah, we'll make the DLCs with all these pop-ups. And that is something that we had time to think. And then we realized, what are you doing? Progressive insight is not a bad thing. So sometimes you go down the wrong path and just say, oh, fuck it, and just change course, pardon my French, and do something else. He says, Baldur's Gate will always have a warm spot in our heart. We're going to be forever proud of it, but we're not going to continue it. We're not making any new expansions, which everybody's expecting. We're not going to make Baldur's Gate 4, which everybody's expecting us to do. We're going to move on. So this is what led to the TV show being made here. Like Larian making a unprecedented decision has led to the TV show. Some other little bit of information here on why they did this. They went this way because Larian said that Baldur's Gate 4 couldn't really happen because of the constraints of D&D combat. This is something they talked about a lot with of course, Divinity, that the combat is going to be very different, and that they blamed the kind of D&D 5th edition rule set here, which had a lot of constraints, and that's why they wanted to make Divinity, because I guess they have some big plans for combat that they couldn't do otherwise here. This is something that Sven actually said that counter to expectations, he's never been more sure about a strategy shift here, and I really respect that take here, because it takes guts, and certainly they made a lot of money here. There's also a couple a little bit of additional little tea, I would call it, on why we ended up here. In the AMA that Larian just did over Divinity, they were asked about Baldur's Gate 3 for Switch 2, and they said we would love to, but it wasn't our decision to make. Nate the Hate then commented on this and said that while Larian would love to bring it to Switch 2, their relationship with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast is not healthy. This is something that they have denied as recently as 2024. Despite this news story being quite recent. Sven did say that reading the Reddit threads, I would like to clear up something. Wizards of the Coast is not to blame for us taking a different direction. On the contrary, they really did their best and have been a great licensor for us, letting us do our thing. This is because it's what's best for Larian. So, I mean, Sven's a professional, really nice guy. There's that element too. Do you want to believe him or Nate the Hate, who's been like a spot-on leaker? I think both can be true at the same time, perhaps, here. Now, obviously, we want to know how Larian is feeling about this TV show adaptation, because what we saw here was Larian is not involved, right? So what did Sven have to say about this? He wrote the following: crazy that a story that started out in a small hotel conference room eventually evolved into a narrative inspiring enough to become an HBO series. We worked incredibly hard on making Baldur's Gate 3 worthy of its legacy and then its characters and its narrative are the result of many teams working together. And I think I can speak for them all in saying that they'll think this is cool and hope that what comes next will enjoy the same level of passion. The endings of Baldur's Gate 3 were created so that they could serve as narrative soil for new adventures. There's plenty of directions they could go. I'm eager to find out which one Craig and his team will pick. He's reached out for a chat, so we'll have the opportunity to tell him our thoughts. Crossing our fingers that the story we're cooking up for Divinity will eventually grow to the same heights. Certainly we're putting in the hours. And I'd love to hear that they're even thinking on that big of a level already for Divinity. But yeah, they're going to talk to Larian at the very least. But this was announced without any sort of Larian involvement. And then when they were asked, Sven, hey, is Larian's writers consulting on the show? He said, not to my knowledge, but Craig did reach out to ask us if we could come over to the studio and speak with us. From the conversation we had, I think he's truly a big fan, which gave me some hope. So Sven isn't doing out there like a lot of us here, which is at least encouraging. And Larian's having a great time with it. They're like talking about fan casting for this show. So that's kind of what you got here with this situation. Sven isn't totally down on it. Meanwhile, though, if you go to let me bring up his profile here. If you go up to Cromwell's profile and you scroll through some of his posts here, he was the one who was just like, oh, I'm out. Red flag here. Like, son, what are we fucking doing here? I'm out. So, I mean, Larian is always allowed their team to express themselves. Maybe he feels a particular way about it versus Sven. But I feel like when you read into that a little bit, it's like, oh boy. Ultimately, it comes down to this, right? Will the freedom of all these different storylines and again, a new story, right? You're building off of something. Is that going to allow Craig to be a little more creatively free if that was the problem compared to something like The Last of Us Season 2 where they just kind of got like stir crazy with it and had to change things that didn't need to be changed. I mean, I also come from like the background of I'm not like a big fan of The Last of Us Part 2 story in the first place. Like that's just where I am. But something like this TV show here has the potential to go in an interesting direction, but I don't know, man. I read this all and I don't know how you feel confident in this immediately, right? Like even if he cares, even if he's a big fan, track record kind of speaks for itself in good and bad ways. Some people are starting to call him a one-hit wonder, which I think can be a little bit fair now to say. Larian not being heavily involved, but just being asked and consulted is something here. So, you know, from that point, once they give them his feedback, it doesn't sound like it's going to be additional collaboration. So I want to believe I would rather this be done in a video game. I feel like if I'm Hasbro and you're not doing a Baldur's Gate 4 because that's going to be the TV show, I hope they remake Baldur's Gate 2. It's a lot of people's favorite games of all time. It's one of the best RPGs ever made, according to a lot of people who have played it. I think modernizing that would be a good choice without worrying about how do we follow up a legacy performance from Larian. It's like, okay, just take Baldur's Gate 2 and make it prettier. Don't change anything else, and that'll work. So that's their plan. This also may not be in substitute of Baldur's Gate 4. Like Baldur's Gate 4 could be at a different point in a timeline somewhere. I don't know. But that's what's going on. Baldur's Gate TV series on the way. Pretty shocking. I really didn't expect this to be a pivot after they didn't do DLC or Baldur's Gate 4. It was like, yeah, let's do a TV show and continue the story that way. So we'll see. But I think these worlds thrive on choice and consequence and just how you change the story. I think the narrative for Baldur's Gate 3 is great, but I think it's great because of the ways I can mold it. That's what makes it so impactful. When you can't mold it and these characters are rigid and you're just watching things happen, it's a whole different like viewer-creator relationship that we'll see. We'll see how it goes. That Baldur's Gate TV show ought to be fun to watch one way or another.